Zen. 'Tis not an ideology, but rather a way of being. Hello and namaste. Coming at you bright and early, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Friday, January 28th. This is today's Nugget of Zen. Greetings and salutations to the audience around the world tuning in from 25 plus countries. I am your fractal mystic podcast host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Join me in exploring the radical intersection of politics, society, and transcendent spirituality. Welcome to the Zeppoverse. Join me in clearing the mind and settling the intellect as we kick off today's Nugget of Zen. Thank you, DJ Zed, for the robotic animatronic synthetica dance music. To understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet. Jiddu Krishnamurti. A quote to kick off this segment. Join me for a little ritual we have on the Almost Daily ZenCast. Let us join together in a moment of stillness and silence to honor all those who have passed in just the last 28 days since the kicking off of the new year. Death has been a bit busy. And friends, if my dark humor seems a bit morbid or inappropriate or too soon, forgive me. I am of the mind, I am of the thinking that death is not the enemy. That death is a lonely, lonely partner, and indeed, quite counterintuitively, a prerequisite to life. And that, yes, there is trauma and pain and sadness and loss and grief, and these temporary human emotions are to be honored and felt and processed and contemplated, but not clung to like some form of addiction. And to that end, we practice, consciously or unconsciously, moments of grieving and of honoring the dead and acknowledging the pain. Join me in taking a moment before we launch into today's discussion to honor everyone. Coincidentally, for those who may or may not be aware, there is a day of national mourning here in the United States of America, which is, as all things tend to be these days post the Trumptopian administration, both unifying and highly polarizing. In New York City, they're holding ceremonies or have just had recent past tense, as in I've been lagging a bit and getting ready to kick off the show, and this was happening East Coast time. But they were honoring police officers that were cut down in the line of duty and were just a recent wave of anti-police gun violence. So recognizing the boys in blue, the men and women in uniform on all levels, the emergency workers, the victims of famines and war and plague, and the much beloved celebrities and those who passed in the dark without recognition. Let's take a moment, please, to honor that, to honor those lives extinguished, independent of and setting aside all potential political analysis. People who passed deserve a moment of silence. Namaste. May they rest in peace, and may we transcend our divisions through such ceremonies and rituals and touchstones of communion. Hello, and welcome to the show. Thank you for indulging me. I like to do that every so often and throw it into the mix in a very sincere and honest attempt to normalize that shit. Because why did we not normalize it? Why did we denormalize it? So, welcome to the shit show. The world is indeed a dumpster fire of crazy. Gun violence is spiking in the United States. Despite all the much ado about nothing argumentation in the public sphere about guns, gun violence, gun regulation, etc. And mind you, before we get sucked down that debate rabbit hole, I'd like to just declare right here for any audience members that haven't previously encountered any of the several episodes in which I talk about guns, gun violence, gun laws, etc. My opinion on this complicated issue my opinion on this complicated issue is nuanced and probably not what most people are assuming and projecting at others that they perceive as the opposition. Forgive the awkward pause there, but I had a simultaneous attack of hiccups, cough, and sneeze tickle and wasn't sure which way it was going to go. Turned out to be a burp. But I digress. That's not the subject of today's episode, at any rate. please do pin that note to the corkboard and keep it in the back burner of our minds in this collective imaginary space that we create together when you join me in this public discourse podcast entertainment show. And we'll come back full circle to it. But just let it be known, my opinion is not nuanced, so please don't try and tell me what it is, because odds are you'll get it wrong. Let's have a discussion about what it is. And please know that I am not, as is often projected and assumed incorrectly, or assumed and then projected, either way, incorrectly, radically anti-gun. I don't want to strip away people's sidearms. I just want a little bit of quote-unquote, and there's a pin up on the board already for the following. I want people to use quote-unquote common sense and or whatever kind of sense we can actually build in common. As many of you may know, I don't really think common sense ever existed about the decisions that we make regarding those issues. And that's a whole nother conversation that we've had before and we'll have again. On today's segment, thank you for bearing with me. On today's segment, transitioning away from honoring all those who have passed, irregardless of standing, origin, ethnicity, and cause of death, and setting aside all the political discourse and ideation and demagoguery about those who've passed, because I find that while that has its place in the public discourse, I don't find it particularly interesting or satisfying for me to engage in, and I don't particularly see much room for cumulative problem solving down that path. Perhaps in a better time, in a more nuanced age, when we really need to dig deep and do the spiritual work on our somewhat, and I use this word carefully, not in the casual, degrading, typical 90s use of the term. I mean this in a functional, like this is, I don't mean this to correlate it with any individual, but rather that the thing is not working. Let's say dysfunctional. I was going to say retarded, but that word is just so loaded it's not worth using anymore. Our dysfunctional relationship with death. Perhaps in a more nuanced time and age, when we've transcended all the demagoguery and the madness and the fanaticism that polarizes us now, perhaps then we can do that kind of work. Let it suffice that we honored those who passed and took it seriously, and that we included an acknowledgement of a very serious subject that needs further sensible, rational, civil discourse in the public sphere before we can really get at any practical solutions, i.e. the entire nexus of gun problems. And let us move on to a broader, more umbrella-level category of discourse about some ideas here. On today's show, as I was trying to get my way back to, and forgive me, my thought process is a bit spirally, but that's a feature, not a bug. Put a pin in that. On today's episode, I want to focus on normalizing, reintroducing, since this show sort of flows both backwards and forwards in time. I just want to create a tentpole moment, an attenuation moment, and introduce / reintroduce, depending on the audience member, the idea that I think could be considered the most central core pillar of my core pillars of my cobbled together, it's not my thesis about what the WTF is going on in this thing we call reality. Which is, I know, a hot topic of discourse in the public sphere of entertainments known as the interwebs. But here we are nonetheless. The other day, an image came to me that needed capturing, and as I'm trying to deploy this new time-independent sort of patchwork system of capturing ideas and presenting them to the audience. Join me in indulging in a little field notes report taken from a few days ago, which will be the core through line that will play back this idea and then pause and take time to discourse about it. But first, so that we can set some structural formula up and create a little bit of cleansing of the palate, a brief musical interlude. Urban Skies Shining, a DJ Z electronic loop media asset UK drill remix live to tape digital remix entertainment performance for your listening pleasure. Part of the voluminous fictional music catalog, because it is part of a literary work, not an actual thing. But put a pin in that. We'll talk about it more on the other side, and then we'll dive deep into discussing a cosmic cosmology of what if it's alive. Cleanse the mind. Take a moment. Indulge me in this rhythmic pattern of delivery and enjoy this muzak of synthetica robot dance, rhythmic blah de blah. I'm just. Oh, is it? DJ Z, the transdimensionally infamous animatronic entertainment DJ robot from another timeline. From his minimalist expressionist period, I do believe, he's giving me that stern animatronic look of like, you totally fudged the intro, bro. You kept babbling and you ruined the first couple of bits, and I'm sorry. I apologize, DJ Z. I also apologize that I don't have you mic'd up so that we can hear your subtle yet quite communicative gizmo whirligig sound effect sounds that you emote with for lack of a verbal English language capacity. Okay, so a living cosmology. Let's talk about it. Let's first set up some context. And forgive me, I understand that I have a bit of a Encyclopedia Britannica / intellectually snobby sounding narrative voice on occasion, but I assure you, to the best of my ability, as an artificial synthetic life form from a literary book story dimension that you can read all about over on Wattpad.com, I'm not intending to be snooty. I'm not looking down my nose over my bifocal lens reading spectacles at the audience. I just speak oddly. So here we go, folks. Context. Right? Fundamental stuff. Some people might be over aware of this sort of thing and find it tedious. Some people may be like, what is he talking about? And may be all new. But generally speaking, contextually speaking, there are broadly, and there's always a third spectrum, but let's just stick to the broad polemics here. The typical terrain of academic opinion or academic school of thought. Let's put it that way. It's more of an educated guess than a raw, uninformed opinion. That the universe, i.e., everything we call reality, right, is either, theoretically speaking, strictly materialist in its nature, in its form, in its function, in its varied expression, and in its way of working, or not strictly exclusively materialist. This is a theme I have visited upon often, as you may note, the circular, spirally, swirling vortex nature of my train of thought. So let's acknowledge that there's a pin on the board about it, right? If you've come across the times in the last 5 years that we've gone on a sidebar, minute or in depth about this subject, see if you can't tap into your collective memory about it and bring it into the consciousness and the shared theater of the spiritual imagination that we create when we watch, listen, consume this content here together, and proceed the discussion. The theory that I weave into the world building of the book series that I'm writing, from which I derive the character names that we throw about here, which is indeed, what makes this podcast show not journalism per se, but an entertainment audio blog where we trip the light fantastic from the worlds of fiction to the world of fact and back again. In that thesis, in that world-building thesis, I propose, as a matter of literary construction, right, as a stipulation of the way the world in the books works at baseline, that the more accurate attempt at describing the world, if we can say the world casually, as in it contains everything, not this world, but the world, if we call everything the world, reality itself, is beyond the limitations, that its scope, form, function, etc., the phrase I coined above, or below, or before, however you want to think of it, a moment ago, is on all of those dimensions, on all of those levels, in all of those ways that we can attempt to verify, and that we may not be able to attempt to verify under this current state of evolutionary. I totally missed the timing on that. I didn't mean to burp in your ear, and it totally just happened there, and I apologize. Awkward. What the double hockey sticks was I saying just now? Oh, that it's more than just the materialist view, right? That the materialist view, vis-a-vis its own limitations and its atheism, its chosen self-appointed, self-oppressive atheism and denial of anything beyond the scope of the materialist, renders it partially correct but inherently flawed and therefore severely limited and not to be taken as absolute truth, because reality functions in a way much more complicated, with many more modes of operation that we may or may not have ever come close to recognizing, approaching, measurement of, and description of in our past, in our present, etc. It's a messy alternative definition. The materialist worldview is very clean and reductionist and mechanical, and it is what gives us the bifurcated, I would argue, flawed and sort of broadly incorrect, although containing some elements of analogous truthiness, sort of the dichotomous model of creator and created, past tense, creation as in object, which is the prevailing subconscious mindset of most of the ambulatory, self-expressive, talking consciousness avatar beings that call themselves people. Whether they realize it or not, whether they think they are an atheist or not. Like, everyone was bombarded and heavily influenced by what may be called in some circles, and I don't mean to bring unnecessary connotations here, but the Judeo-Christian worldview, the cosmology fundamentally defined by the cumulative historical, philosophical works of the Judeo-Christian world, historically speaking. Is that the most accurate model? Debate rages on within the confines of those schools of thought. And of course, debate rages on in the world beyond the limitations of those schools of thought. But I venture to say that for as long as, and now mind you, I understand that none of those things are monoliths unto themselves. Pin on the board already, multiple references about monolithic thinking. You'll catch on. You'll see what I'm saying, pin on the board. It'll all make sense. Stick with me, my narrative gets weirder. So invoking all of that and all the interconnected threads that you may already be familiar with that are up on that corkboard of webs of interconnected things, we have to set aside, we have to work consciously, whether a person, doesn't matter where you're coming from, where you were anchoring your previous worldview, to engage in an earnest, intellectually honest exploration of the following content. We have to be willing, collectively, in this space that we share here together during the course of the discussion that occurs in these podcasts, episodes, and on the live stream, etc. Set those things aside. Not burn them to the ground, but set them aside for all the reasons why we can and should, without necessarily adopting and jumping to unwarranted conclusions in the opposite direction. Also, it must be noted. And explore the terrain, the topography of the idea of a quote-unquote living cosmology from the perspective of understanding everything that we've set aside and trying to explore the new information that we're about to discuss from the perspective of, like, how can both those things be the most true, not which one is going to win. Okay? If we agree to that, we can proceed with the reviewing of the pre-recorded content. Please indulge me in this new format as we explore. We're going to be tinkering with it on multiple levels, hopefully creating an interesting end result over time. But here we go. A few vivid, lucid thoughts about the holographic nature of reality. All right, first interjection. In my setup and contextualization, I totally forgot to talk about holograms, which is kind of critical for the if I'm going to give an honest setup for like the context before we even begin. So let's pause there, and I'll even throw on a little bit of external auxiliary DJ Z music, which will hopefully read okay in the background. Not too overpowering. Oh, not that button. Hopefully that's not too overpowering and not too quiet. Holograms and holographic as technical terms, not, and I don't mean the typical commercial first impression definition of the word. I don't mean the dancing image created by computer CGI coordinates and laser beam projectors of some celebrity performance artist at a concert, although they're not inherently mutually exclusive, because that celebrity hologram works and exists in our real world because holograms and fractals are what they are. I find myself distracted by my... Oh, wait, that's not what I meant to do. I find myself distracted by my own attempt to, like, back this up with music. And I think we'll just pause here with the music, I mean. So, really quick. We're going to spiral through and discuss the concept of a living holographic fractal cosmic cosmology. So, what are fractals? There's a pin on the corkboard, but we'll give a nice little microdose definition. Technically speaking, invented by a gentleman whose last name I believe is Mandelbrot, spelled Mandelbrot, but French, so pronounced with a silent T, Mandelbrot. It's a naturally occurring, and I don't know if this is part of the official definition, but there are abstract fractal algorithms, and then there are like fractal algorithms that are observed in nature. So we consider them to some degree or another like evident in nature without mankind having had to invent them. And the mind can conceive of abstract algorithms that we don't yet see in nature explicitly, but must be sort of part of the package. Okay, so a fractal can be defined as a naturally occurring algorithm that renders an infinitely zoomable pattern image that creates complexity through recursive self-reference and repetition with with an infinite internal surface area of form and shape and form, bound by a finite boundary. What is that? If you just pause and think about that, what does that remind you of? To some, and I'm not making character judgments here, to myself and others included, to some like myself, I'm trying to find the most friendly way of phrasing this idea. To many of us, that sounds like the universe itself. To the best of our understanding, the known universe is presumptively, based on evidence, infinite, and yet somehow finite in its form, which seems counterintuitive at first until you realize that infinity and finiteness co-create each other. They are not two diametrically opposed separate opposites. They are two sides of the same coin, two ends of the same pole that share a bandwidth of phenomena in between. Put a pin in that right there, because that's something that we undervalue and underestimate and really should renormalize, comprehending that reality, both in terms of identifiable ideological constructs that sort of seem to exist on a power of their own, or with the power of people, opposing them and supporting them. I for some reason the Spanish word wanted to come up first, apoyando, and then I said opposing, but ideologies can thrive in a virtual, shared imaginative space because of the power of belief. Big giant pin on the corkboard already. So I hope you look forward to stumbling into some abstract discussion, sidebar stuff about that complicated idea in past and future episodes. Okay, I don't know if I'm helping clarify fractal holographicism, but a fractal isn't a purely theoretical, human-made, human-invented mathematical construct. It is a form and function feature of reality itself, most readily depicted, as I've pointed out before on the show, and it's not my scientific discovery or anything, but there's a quote attributable to a gentleman whose name always escapes me, and I never have the meme in front of me, and it's a hard to pronounce name of exotic origin that reminds me of Anais Nin, but is not Anais Nin. I digress. Name error file not found. The quote goes something along the lines of the most powerful evidence to the fractal nature of reality is the fact that people come out of other people. The other simple, natural, undeniable source for visual confirmation of fractal patterning, fractal mathematics in the organic pattern is vegetative plant life. There's a great sequence about that in that documentary film I'm always hyping. That's a genuine and authentic, multiple thumbs up, 18-star endorsement. 19 out of 20 stars, 18 and a half, let's be fair. Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds on YouTube. I think I might add that link just for funsies because I've been talking about it a lot to my solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Welcome to the Zeppoverse collection of links as a sort of like genuine endorsement. This is the real deal. Go watch this. And a lot of the things that we talk about on my podcast show will be beautifully visually illuminated for you. It's just a well-crafted, spiritual, scientific documentary. Haters will hate on it and say it's pseudoscience, but I think it's one earnest spiritual seeker's questioning attempt to share what they've come to understand, and in it is a beautiful depiction of what a fractal is, how we see fractal expression in reality, in nature itself, in our very own bodies, and in the mysterious orchestration of the movements of the very firmament itself, to co-opt and recontextualize a ye olde ancient term. Although I don't like it because it's been already preemptively hijacked by the flat Earth argument, and I don't want to get into that now. Oh man, okay, so I don't know that helped any or if it made things worse, but we're going to talk about the universe, the totality of reality itself, and we're going to begin from the postulate: what if reality itself is a living, holographic, fractal consciousness entity? And I'm sure I'll have plenty of opportunity to over-explain all of that as we move through the pre-recorded portion of our show.
Captured as a note for future reference. Where to start? So much of it is already kind of starting to fall apart. A few minutes ago, a very complex image hit me, and I started talking about it out loud unconsciously. And I wish that I had been in the position to be able to just automatically audio tape myself and be playing that back. But here we go at a quick recap before it all disappears, because I'm nowhere near ready to actually launch a live recording of the show just yet. I've got some other to-do things to knock off before I even get there. But
pause, sidebar, real life, the struggle is real statement. That happens to me so much, too often. So forgive the weird, interesting format. This is an attempt to rectify. I'm trying to get to that place when just as the first draft of an idea hits me, I'm audio recording it. Irregardless of whether or not I'm doing dishes or some other activity, and whether, it's an hour away or 2 days away from my next broadcast. Let us proceed. I just thought I'd clarify that for a hot second. And I'll be doing a lot of that, and it'll make the show weird and interesting and probably a lot longer than I anticipate, as we're already at 41:51, and we're not even 2 minutes into this 26-minute and 50, this 29-minute long audio tape. I will endeavor to not interrupt myself for at least 10 or 15 minutes.
Thanks for joining me now. Here's the thought. Let's take it as stated, as mind-boggling as it may be, that the universe, whatever that word encompasses in the totality that we don't even fully understand yet, because there's the known universe, there's like the visible universe, the known universe, the knowable universe, and the unknowable universe. If I may humbly propose that those arguably, if they are not already, should be real, distinct categorizations of areas of knowledge about the universe, and that we should investigate them each equally to the best of our ability as a collective species.
I know I said I was going to go 15 minutes, and I totally didn't. But my collaborator brain begged to interrupt and interject. I missed the category. So there's the known universe, and that's commonly referred to as the visible universe. Others would reference it as the measurable universe, the confirmable, verifiable universe. I often like to reference it as the phenomenological universe, to remind ourselves that our understanding of it is shaped, formed, arguably even defined, most certainly limited by the bandwidth through which we can experience it. Sight, hearing, touch, sight, sound, texture, intellect, and emotive frequencies. So that's the known universe. I want to hyper clarify. The knowable universe is a caveat of that which may be out there that we do not know yet, but is accessible to be known by us in our current mode of operation. That's the knowable universe, right? What you know, what you don't know yet, to phrase it slightly differently. It's sort of like that pie chart about the shit you know. There's a pin on the corkboard about it. Okay. So the known universe, the knowable universe, the unknown universe, which is sort of like a bleed over to, I guess maybe that's why I went straight to unknowable, because the knowable universe is categorically unknown to us, and yet to be discovered. And maybe that's why I chose that wording, and now I'm sort of unnecessarily over-explaining and hyper-correcting myself. But let's see if we can kind of make it work. Known universe, the knowable universe, which is, I guess, it's very similar to the known universe, just yet to be technically discovered. The unknown universe, I think, is defining a spectrum of the universe's features, phenomenologically, potentially experienceable, but as of yet, in the current modality of our limited operation, perhaps a bit beyond the scope of that which we typically might be able to know, to verify. In other words, it's a bit beyond our reach. The way flight was once in our collective living history, right? We lived for quite a long time without airplanes and helicopters and all the other fancy things that we now kind of take for granted. So arguably, an evolutionary development or three down the path of our evolutionary future, and we will be able to access this hitherto unknowable dimension. And then the known, the knowable, the unknown, and the unknowable universe, which is to say that arguably, even if we evolve those two or three hitherto yet to be achieved evolutionary prerequisites to achieve an even higher degree than we have currently, there will be this further away horizon, this impossible to reach, this impossible to probe, impossible to know potential bandwidth of phenomena or events or energies or items or features or architecture, what I sometimes like to meta-reference as topography of the cosmology, that may be even in some next level advanced place unknowable to us even then. Not to say it would never be knowable to us, because, never say never, the way that one song from that one James Bond movie reminds us to. Oh, put a pin on the corkboard for reference over in the irrelevant media review department. All the different things, all the different ways we could spend a day or three chit-chatting our way through the entire catalog of James Bond cinematic history. But I digress. Let's not. I mean, let's put a pin on that. Let's put a pin on the corkboard about that, because I do indeed intend to explode the hitherto somewhat minuscule, rarely featured special segment, totally irrelevant media reviews. But I digress. Let's return now to the pre-recorded content and see what further progress we can make without interruption.
But I digress. The known, visible, and the knowable universe could be explained, as I and several others might argue, as a living, holographic, multidimensional, fractal, holographic, probability waveform function tree of life or tree of manifesting infinite possible experiential outcomes. Science isn't fully prepared to take the leap to saying, yes, that's what we think it is, and have built, broad global consensus, but they're poking and prodding at the fringy edges of going in that general direction. As I've been pointing out over the last couple of decades, science keeps hitting certain keynote, quote-unquote, discoveries that arguably can be found in an array of wisdom traditions from throughout history, from all over Mother Earth, from a broad spectrum of cultural traditions. Given that, one could say, without crossing the red line of asserting that this is all a simulation, which I refute, and I pin the only sort of evidence that I think is necessary to refute the simulation theory, and that's that we are alive. Things that are, life is life. Life is alive. Although, I must admit a sub-caveat, my overall meta-arcing thesis is not incompatible with the possibility that this is all a massive simulation. And I think that that my theory would rationally express that any such phenomenological time landscapes or time frames, timelines, or probability waveform outcomes are a subset of the infinite holographic, organic, living, fractal probability waveform function spectrum of possible universes that are being churned into existence by the ultimate metaversal ontological origin or original universe. I kind of want to use both, like origin as in it is the origin of all else, and it is the original universe.
For clarity, really quick, the reason I would argue that any simulation universe, however complex and infinite it may appear inside of itself, because they all do, right? Any universe inside of the multiverse of multiverses, because to take it literally, and I don't mean to infringe on any entertainment media copyright, like it's not my fault that I'm not taking this concept from the fact that it's turning up in movies. It's turning up in movies because humanity's been contemplating the nature of reality for a long time. And multiple ancient sources and now increasingly multiple postmodern sources are exploring the philosophical implications and the mathematical possibilities of a multiverse of multiverses. And of course, I'm anchoring my expression of a thesis in fractal mathematics. So it's just, by nature of that, it is those things. And I just wanted to clarify that, and there was another thought that I wanted to interject really quick, and I think I may have lost it. I wanted to pause and say, there's a pin on the corkboard of many pins about science and the wedge issue of arguing anti-science, pro-science ideology, and the notion of like science versus corrupted science or corruption in science. But there's a pin on the board, and I hope you look forward to discovering, traipsing across the landscape of of my mind, the places where I've gone on sidebars and discussed that. And of course, as all things that are pinned up on the board, I'll make a point to come back full circle and discuss it again to make sure that, there's clarity, and always looking forward to any sort of question on those subjects. But needless to say, in short, I disambiguate and differentiate between industry, where the corruption lies, and like genuine science and authentic methodology in earnest exploration of deep, ancient, probative scientific themes, such as the one we were discussing. Okay, back to the pre-recorded content, and I'm going to tinker with something. I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of music to underscore the feed and see if it works out. You'll forgive me as always, friends, as I continue to tinker with such sorts of things on this and my other streaming content shows. And for whenever there's misfires and flubs and mess-ups and rough moments, my sincerest apologies. But if nothing else, it is evidence that it's really just me, and that this show is really, truly real, raw, radically unscripted, and a diamond in the rough, as it were.
But, okay, so I was saying I don't want to cross that line over to this is simulation, and then I caveated my way into a place where I can recognize we could theoretically realize that we are in a simulation. That simulation would therefore probably be based on the organic fractal reality that I'm talking about and function similarly if it's trying to accurately simulate it. And it would be a subset of the very living thing in which we did that to ourselves for some reason, and escaping it would nonetheless probably follow the same logic I'm proposing for what applies to the organic living universe. As a prebuttal or preemptive disclaimer to my following statement, I said all of that. You know how in video games you have different kinds of quests, and in different video games they manage it differently. But broadly speaking, without getting bogged down into a video game nerd universe discussion about specific games, specific traditions, specific tropes or archetypes, there's, broadly speaking, like a category of quests that you might call your main quests, each of which might have their own episodic subplot or story to tell that may contribute to a larger, overarching, ongoing series of stories that make the main playable playthrough experience. And I'm just talking about that as a mechanic, right? We can get into the nuance of how detailed each of those different elements may get or whatever. But there's also, to finish the mechanic analogy, there's subplots. Now, subplots don't always, but sometimes, prevent you from advancing through the main plot, right? But mostly, usually, the gameplay is, broadly speaking, carried forward by the main quests, not necessarily the subquests. Some subquests, that was a tricky, unnecessary alliteration. A few of these subquests or side quests might very well be critical for various reasons. Well, imagine in life that you have a similar sort of setup, but we had an added layer of distractionary postmodern life quests of like working the grind. Those don't really advance anything besides working the grind, right? And that's the rat race as we know it at all. The whole thing that the meme is infamous, right? Were we born as divine vessels of cosmic consciousness onto this living orb of giving birth to life to just consume and destroy the very womb that sustains us, to commodify it so we can drive to work and toxic things and do work that may or may not be super fulfilling, and barely have time to do anything beautiful and meaningful and phenomenologically related to our other quests, which we've long neglected? I humbly suggest to you that we might live in a universe in which some of the sub-quests or side quests aren't really so easily dismissed or to be ignored, because they are indeed intrinsically important for advancing the real primary through line, which is arguably got nothing to do with about 97% of what we preoccupy ourselves in our day-to-day lives, even if we're living kind of spiritual, right? Let's be blunt, because we don't know what we don't know.
I wanted to pause there. Why am I talking about missions and quests? And did my little tinkering experiment with trying to live mix some sound in the background work? I realized it backfires in one way. When I do that, I can't hear the playback of the previously recorded commentary. Therefore, I can't track what I'm saying and develop things I want to interject. So, anyways, I teased you guys with a track called New Beginnings Disrupt Ancient Endings, which you can check out and vote for over on soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo/sets, and then finding it in the fresh new tracks for 2022 entitled New Beginnings, New Releases, January 22 First Quarter Album Playlist. Lots of word salad going on. Let's parse out some things from that last little chunk o tape. Why am I talking about quests? And how seriously do I want you guys to take me? Why would a living universe have quests? We can go into a deep dive about all kinds of theoretical statements about what's going on there. I use it as an analogy because we already, even in the world, the normative world, not judging it, just indicating it, the normative world, the reductionist world that we sort of unconsciously co-share, that is mostly, as I was, suggesting at the beginning of the show, defined by the sort of cause and effect, creator-created conglomeration of creationism and materialism. And by materialism, I don't mean the ego buying of too much stuff you don't need, although we need another word for that, so we don't confuse the two. I mean, the perspective that the world is only material, and that's it. A living universe that's alive, like anything that's alive, would have consciousness. One of the defining, although people tend to argue about it and use it as a dismissive, pejorative way of mocking and humorously attacking each other, and trying to define one another as having no consciousness. I don't mean conscience as in like a sense of moral code. I mean consciousness as in awareness that one is alive. What else is consciousness besides a recursive, self-referencing self-actualization, right? Of like, I perceive myself, therefore I am. That's much more accurate than I think, therefore I am. Lots of people sit around being quite confident in themselves without doing very much thinking. You perceive yourself, therefore you are, is much more accurate. So a living universe, and like I said, I don't think this is that radical of an idea. Carl Sagan infamously created the 70s meme way back in the day before we had the internets, that you are the eyes and ears and skin of a living universe trying to understand itself, or something to that effect. One of the founding fathers of physics, Planck, spoke about consciousness being the ground of all being, I believe was his terminology, if not something similar. Or maybe I'm confusing two different quotes, but it's littered everywhere, right? It's throughout. So as an analogy, I'm suggesting we understand in the materialist box the idea of meaning and purpose, right? Even when we only accept the smaller diminutive model, we still spend a lot of time thinking about our meaning and our purpose. What is the point of life? So arguably, if those questions are still being sought out in a living universe, one could argue that perhaps the living universe has its own awareness of necessary operations, to coin a term, right? To call it something. And that also, and part of my reasoning that's unspoken here, which is a meme I've already made and distributed into the universe, into the world, is that the cosmos itself, being a living universe full of whatever it's full of, doing all the things that it's doing that we are unfortunately not super cognizant of, it has no need. I can't see why it would. So arguably, my logical conclusion based on observation is that it has no need, or next to little need, next to zero need. So little need of the ideological constructs that we collectively as life forms have crafted and brought into existence through the use of our thinking minds, filtered through the problematic issues of our ego. In short, the cosmos seriously has no need for any of the shit we argue about. Ideology. Now, that can be a terrifying and quite alarming thinky thought to process. It can be a big deal and a bit even, potentially confrontational sounding. I don't mean it that way. I think that free will exists. I am not trying to suggest that the living universe is some sort of wrathful God that's going to judge you and destroy you based on your chosen ideology. I don't know that it does that. I don't think that it does that. I think it's easy for fearmongers pretending to be prophets to create those kinds of fear-mongerings, but that's the work of ego. As I've pointed out, there's a pin on the corkboard about how, and I've recently discussed on the newest addendum to the programming that I provide on my social media platforms, the almost daily login, the embarrassingly rough and tumble video live stream chat show, which I guess you can now consider, one way we can think of it is that whole effort is as a sort of office hours discussion chat session in affiliation with the show, which you can check out by clicking through solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and looking for the Twitch TV live stream link. But I digress. Back on track. Let's say that perhaps, just maybe, it is possible that a living cosmos might have at the fundamental self-awareness of itself some, and let's not belittle it by calling it an opinion, some point of view, some hierarchy of needs, right? If it is all a fractal, and we are created in God's image, and we're arguably trying to say that God might very well be the very totality of the universe itself, experiencing itself through all the other distillations of consciousness that it has emanated forth from its source self to mix and match religious language with metaphysical language with quantum physical language. If it has no needs for especially the most toxic and pointless and arguably self-oppressive and self-manipulative of political ideologies, it also makes sense that it might very well have its own slate of preferred conceptual constructs of high degree of complexity that to our little materialist, ego-driven, politically defined minds might seem mind-bogglingly crazy. Let's return to the previously recorded content to see what kind of thoughts we extrapolate from having arrived to such weighty weights and such highfalutin high notes in our public discourse here.
And the evidence indicates a whole array of phenomena, a whole array of cosmic infrastructure and cosmic activity that we're ever so unfortunately mostly ignorant of.
What evidence, you may be asking? There's a slew of it. From the direct personal, albeit obviously analogous, that's not the word, what's the word? Anecdotal evidence of generations worth of entheogenic psychonauts. And that's not a judgmental, pejorative, dismissive term. That's how they might all collectively decide to call themselves if they were all in the same room at the same time. From Terence McKenna and the giants of sort of socially, collectively forgotten thinkers and authors on the subject of decades past before him, to those cutting edge psilocybin as therapeutics investigators and activists out there working with magic mushrooms and other herbal tools. There's evidence also streaming in from authors of the metaphysical of all ilks and meditators from all cultures and philosophers of all kinds. So it's difficult to sum up for someone who's sort of new to the journey of questioning this line of subject matter to be like, okay, well, sum it up for me. Like, okay, what kind of evidence are we talking about? From accounts of near-death experience to accounts of intradimensional phenomena accessible through psychedelics, to the mathematic explorations of ever smaller frameworks of reference in the working models of quantum physics, and the poetic language of ancient mystics. Evidence indicates that we could build a large, cumulative, inclusive metathesis with the features included in the discourse we're having here in this episode. Let me pause for a minute and try the inverse of my previous experiment. Let me regale you with a different bit of palate-cleansing audio entertainment for just a moment. Just tease you one of the tracks available over on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo, where I humbly invite you to visit and indulge in enjoying the music of the Zeppoverse, free of all the bookending of me chit-chatting long, laborious spirals of contemplative thought of different things. And I humbly invite you to go vote for your favorite tracks by clicking on the hearts. And if you feel so bold, retweeting or sharing to other platforms the ones you find the most entertaining. And of course, simply by the overall play count as you indulge in listening to them on your free time. As the lists will be curated, culled, and updated. Hopefully, we envision it monthly in a quarterly cycle, and at the end of the year, fingers crossed, an NFT album, video album. Here is DJ Z with Slow Grooves, Deep Funk. That's the animatronic DJ Z, teasing you with the first half of Slow Grooves, Deep Funk, a laid back something something. What is it? What's the name of the track? Darn it, I can't read it all. Let me click through. A laid back hip hop groove pad, live to tape, digital remix performance, available for your exclusive listening pleasure on soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Go check it out. Okay, so back to the discussion at hand. A living cosmology, a giant fractal that is creating multiple probability waveform function timelines, both individually for every living creature that's alive, and collectively for every collection of species that builds community, and the web of interrelated life forms that are given birth to on these terrestrial uteruses or wombs that we diminutively call planets. Let's go from there and see what else we laid down on this previously recorded audio note.
And barely sort of coming to terms with, realizing, we might want to consider whether or not that stuff is more important than we've been giving it credit for over the last 5,000 years, 6,000 years, 10,000 years. Whenever it is we really gave into mocking and belittling and brushing away transcendental cosmic wisdom in favor of the daily grind. Now, we live in a world in which we can't just, not without much inconvenience, as I've pointed out, we have the freedom to, no matter what level of tyranny you think or actually are experiencing. Because let's be honest, Americans in America are up in arms yelling about this tyranny and that tyranny. Meanwhile, in countries like Yemen, other things of quite, much more epically oppressive proportions are happening that would make the nonsense going on here in Trumptopia kind of laughable. But larger picture, folks, and here's the big oomph. Let's drive it home. The critical thing that came to me crystal clear. It's that as the onists or the oneists like to point out, and I love whenever I see someone reinvent that meme in a beautiful, elegant way. In fact, I'm kind of gathering a collection of the meme restated and remixed and thinking of ways to reinvent it myself a few times. And that's that it is entirely likely, dear friends, and this is my own goofy, relaxed and groovy rewording of their general gist of the meme that I'm mentally referencing. And that's that, for better or worse, broadly speaking, the world's organized religions don't have, not one of them, the singular absolute truth. But many of them, if not most of the legitimate ones, at some point managed to preserve some interesting puzzle piece or another of spiritual meaningfulness worthy of reinvestigating and rediscovering in postmodern mindfulness. And that there's so much more that none of them even probed. Because as someone I'm virtual acquaintances with recently pointed out in the field of public discourse, the real reality that we argue about and talk about when we use words and terms like absolute truth is fundamentally beyond language. The true, you can't even with the words and the symbols.
And that's a mind-blowing, let's pause there and acknowledge that. That's a mind-blowing thing, right? With words, we argue about lofty ideas, and we attribute some of them as to being, quote, the absolute truth. When in reality, and of course, whenever we stumble into any attempt at approaching a discussion about what truth is truth and how do we handle the concept of absolute truth versus relative truth versus truth that isn't absolute, that meme that I was referencing recently on the Almost Daily Login live stream chat show on Twitch and multiple other platforms, which has that object in the corner with the two lights shining on it from different directions onto two walls, and how the image on those walls, and they're differentiated by color, and you could pick a color scheme like red and blue. although people usually go with less politicized ones like orange and lavender or something. But the two images create different shapes. And the most fundamental, basic, I think, and maybe original version of that meme, each of those shapes, the shadows, is labeled, "This is true." And then the object itself, floating in the corner with the two different light sources cross-lighting it, that is labeled, "This is truth." There's a variation that someone created of it, where the object is labeled reality. And I like that one a lot more. So let's acknowledge a pin on the corkboard. There's all kinds of deep warrens. It's a warren full of rabbit holes to go chasing after the truth, especially if you're aspiring to achieve some ultimate, pentultimate, never-ending ultimate truth or absolute truth. And this sort of thinking invokes the pin on the corkboard about absolutism, so reference that there. But as the reference I was making in the pre-recorded content just now sort of reminds us, the reality of the matter is that whatever the real true truth is, it's beyond the scope, range, and limitations of any of our languages. And that's why it's so easy to forget about, dismiss, out of sight, out of mind. But here's the catch. Here's the catch. Whatever that is, this impossible to grasp with words phenomena that nevertheless humanity in every epoch has in some way or another attempted to approach, identify, and come back from with words to describe it, seems to be, if all the evidence is that is compiled that passes muster is to be taken seriously, seems to be a phenomena that nevertheless can be actively engaged with and experienced directly, phenomenologically, undeniably, undebunkably, immediately, vis-a-vis your internal sensory apparatuses. And while that is so, it is extremely difficult to pursue it externally out there in the world of the known universe, because we're not acknowledging something. Dun dun dun, cue the mystery reveal music. We're not acknowledging a fundamental factor of the way in which life is life in this thing we call the universe, which is a multiverse of multiverses, all happening in the frothy, bubbly, fractal, holographic, massive cosmological imagination, the theater of imagination of the divine origin, the divine whole, the meta brain, the massive cosmic God mind dreaming all of this up. But that, here's the big ta-da, the big reveal, arguably, and I'm not claiming to pretend to know something I don't know. I'm saying I can't disprove the following statement yet. So the critical thinker, with the dash of cynicism in me is like, we should be investigating this thoroughly. All of us. If we can't build a industry around it, right, which is what we usually do, and we acknowledge, as we have on multiple episodes in the past, that all of this mishigas that we call society and the industries that make it possible, that provide the conveniences we're used to, is toxic, maybe we need to look elsewhere. Where is that elsewhere? If it's not out there, as many people point out, from Einstein to wise indigenous voices from many cultures around the living planet that gives birth to life, to call it something other than the things people are arguing about. Inwards, as the one meme reminds us, as the one, because memes are transcendent of the individual instances that people cobble together. They are memes because they reside in the collective awareness of the species. The only way out is in. Let's dive back into this collective inner phenomena and explore some deeply flawed, humble attempt to describe it that I laid down in this previously recorded content.
So let's not get too distracted, mucking about, throwing lances, and waving and rattling swords about such lofty, wordy McThinky thoughts as absolute truth, because we don't even acknowledge the reality that if we had never evolved ears, we may not know what sound is, right? And even though we did evolve ears, we can scientifically verify with mathematic precision that there are kinds of sounds our little, interestingly evolved ears aren't capable of capturing and processing and rendering in the brain, right? Like, we just haven't evolved that yet. There's a whole host of known intangible phenomena, and it would be absurdly naive to preemptively toss out, like a drowning baby in the medieval bathwater, anything and everything that is hitherto intangible and beyond language, if there is a personally verifiable and repeatable way to directly phenomenologically experience it. If, and that's a big if, folks. And that's where some of this transcendental cosmic subject matter, I'm struggling for the right term there, might actually transcend its arguable tendency to be just another seemingly plausible indoctrination trope of some kind, or not, right?
So what I meant by that, because it was unclear to me in listening to it myself, regurgitated back to myself via digital audio tape, the spiritual gets dismissed. I've lost count. If I had a dime, or rather a dollar, if I had a dollar for every time I have been waved off as some hippie, new age, woo-woo, cuckoo crazy nut job by real world individuals or possibly automated bots, it's harder. Apparently it's getting harder and harder to tell these days. Although I think I try to curate my social media connections list effectively enough that I'm not having empty conversations with artificial intelligence language analyzer bots that are pre-scripted to argue one side of a echo chamber wedge issue in order to keep the dynamic engagement going on that wedge issue. Who knows? Maybe I am. And even if I am, I'm hoping I'm giving it to the bots then. And I don't mean by that statement to dismiss anyone I may have had conversations that I might have in the past or may hitherto in the future reference on this podcast anonymously. I'm not dismissing them as bots. I'm not trying to be rude that way. I'm just having too many thoughts at once. The spiritual side of cosmological philosophy gets drowned in the bathwater and unceremoniously drained out the gargoyle water spigot, quite nonchalantly by folks. And any attempt to suggest that that something is being discussed not as a dogmatic article of faith, because I think I'm clear about that, right? Let me be resoundingly clear here and now. When I refer to spiritual isms, I'm avoiding any archaic or contemporary organized dogma about spirituality, right? Because the adage applies to spiritual dogma as it does religious dogma. Organized religion is a dictate to buy into and give over our belief in, right? But the spirituality that I'm talking about and that I'm referencing and that I'm indicating that I try to practice myself and that I think I would encourage others to consider as preferable to any belief dogma is a practice, right? The spirituality I'm talking about is, like I said at the top of the show, Zen is a way of being, not an ideology or dogma to invest belief energy into. I'm not saying that there's no absoluteness in my sweeping away of dogma. It just must be discerned very carefully. And even the best dogma has some serious flaws marbled all throughout it, like a finely marbled beefy steak. But I digress. Doing so, dismissing all things metaphysical as hippie new age nutjob wackadoodle kookadoo that doesn't need to even be addressed, is as naive or ludicrous or beyond logic as dismissing all political ideology as demonstrably originating from an evil satellite of talking octopi robot cyborgs from the planet Mu Mu Zeta 9, right? Like, if you'd stop and go, I have to laugh at that. I can't join you in sweeping away any and all organized political ideology as having originated from that, because it's a bit beyond the pale. And that's why I was appreciating the onists, or the oneists, however you pronounce their little philosophy. No one human organized endeavor to explore the spiritual dimensions of the universe has the quote-unquote authoritative absolute truth. That's a hard pill to swallow, but we gotta all collectively process that, because I think it's accurate. I could be wrong, and there might be some obscure, hitherto undiscovered, or maybe some hidden gem of obscurity hiding in plain sight that nails it, but I highly doubt it, and it hasn't come across my desk as of yet. But conversely, that does not mean that they must all be slaughtered like feral demon hounds at the butcher block and drowned in the baby bathwater of drowning the babies and ditching it out the medieval water spout, which is an analogy I like to overuse because I love the phrase, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." Pardon the eccentricity. There are phenomena of a wide-ranging category of types and ways of experiencing them that have collectively been dismissed in such fashion. Oh, it's all crazy hippie stuff. It's all crazy new age stuff. It's all crazy spiritual cultural appropriation stuff. But the evidence that it is worth examining is that echoes of the most fascinating stuff that is in the babies in this bathwater turn up in all the bathwater, to extend the metaphor in a confusing way. Some of the most fascinating, deep, insightful, relevant spiritual evidence doesn't come from any one given particular source, but seems to be echoed everywhere if you dig for it and find the gemstones and polish the mirror, as it were. If you do the honest work. And being a blind faith sheeple of any given dogma is not doing the work. No offense. I'm not judging people who choose that tack. They market that path really heavy, especially in Christianity, which is kind of hilarious. How many Christians in America are busy calling other people sheeple when their religion literally calls them to be shepherded as a flock and requires that they accept indoctrination on blind faith as a matter of their inauguration to the club, right? And I'm not hating. I'm pointing out, as a former member of the Catholic Church that spent a lot of years looking into its requirements and dogmatic articles of faith, I know whereof which I speak. Let's not be sheeple about anything. And let's return to the through line of this discussion, right? The things I'm inviting you to contemplate, I will tap this pin on the corkboard. All the things I invite you to contemplate, I invite you to contemplate from the perspective of rejecting blind faith consumerist mentality, but rather a joining together of intellectual exploration for the purposes of questioning and exploring. And here we get to the heart of what I was talking about on the previously recorded content. Let's dive back into it.
As you may have already gathered, I don't pretend to know any kind of absolute truth. In fact, absolute truth is something I sort of encourage people to question, especially if the absolute truth you're clinging to is involved in some sort of obvious attempt to manipulate you and others into self-conflict or mutual co-creation of conflict with others. Right?
That, by the way, pin on the corkboard. Plenty of sidebar discussion and primary episode discussion in past episodes and in future episodes. How do you know if you're being manipulated? If you find yourself looking for any and all rationale to engage in conflict and participate in the perpetuation of manufactured outrage. If you're picking fights about ideological wedge issues instead of zenning the fuck out and having intellectually sincere, civilized, civil public discourse in order to build mutual understanding and collaboratively create consensus. As I like to point out repeatedly and often, the point of argumentation in its cleanest form is not to win. It's not to own the opposition. Several pins on the corkboard about those thoughts. Okay, diving back.
Right? If there's some objectification of self or other, if there's some manipulation of self or other, some degradation, hypervilification that is necessary for you to cling to, for you to maintain your allegiance to, as in it asks you to do it, you should totally, absolutely stop and question that absolute truth and pick it apart. To the best of my understanding, reality, if we could set that aside as a separate bucket of tangible, verifiable, undeniable phenomena that may exist beyond the philosophical scope of things people insist are absolutely true, Because people, listen, as I like to be a bit redundant, absolutist statements are rarely absolutely true. Therefore, claims of absolute truth are suspect. Doesn't mean you should be, like freaking out about it, but just question it with the intellectual, spiritual, emotional, mental, emotional, physical due diligence and intellectual, and honesty, frankness about it, so that we can set aside all those things that hinder us metaphysically, that hinder us psychologically, that hinder us emotionally and spiritually. I was trying to see if there's a way to compound that word, and I don't think it sounds right. Emotio-spiritual? I don't know. Because there's plenty of evidence laying about throughout contemporary current events and most of postmodern history, modern history, pre-modern history, and all the bloody endless cycles we've lived through to realize that maybe we're bashing away at a series of quests that are profitable, to say the least, entertaining, perhaps, to some degree or another, and thrilling, undeniably, right? To live through broad, sweeping historical cray-cray is a roller coaster ride. And we sort of engineer and build the roller coaster ride that we're riding on, that we call socio-political current events, and world events and historical world events, right? And all that sort of stuff from the egress of millions because of inhumane and unsustainable conditions in their own living, in their own home jurisdictions, to the real and manufactured outrage coming from all sides about it, and to the rattling of sabers and threatening of endless war in other quadrants, and everything in between. What if, dear friends? And I know that's easily dismissed.
I want to pause here because I realized I sort of left a dangling participle of incomplete statement. The roller coaster ride, on that line of thinking, we create that, we co-create that collectively. The multiverse of multiverses is an infinite hallway mirror at the collective level, at the individual level, at the microscopic level, etc., right? So, yes, there might very well be a probability waveform function tree branch where there's an expression of a collection of universes branching out in little branches that branch, where the universe is what we know, except we're trapped in a computer simulation matrix in which Donald Trump and family established the first American empire of oligarchic proto faux democracy, right? That's entirely possible. But I digress. What was my point there? The thing I stopped to comment on is lost from the tip of my tongue. The multiverse of multiverses is something that's fun in the MCU, but also arguably a living phenomena by which all possible potential outcomes are indeed lived out by an infinite array of variants, to borrow the term, and that collectively this phenomena has a set of structural modalities that we might benefit from being more aware of, because because it impacts our collective experience in ways that we've distracted ourselves from attending to, which might help us reach greater solutions to the complicated problems we've created for ourselves, thinking too tightly inside of a materialist exclusive box. And that in and of itself right there, in and of itself might be very well a huge contributing factor to the existence of manipulative and distractive content. And as I sort of shockingly like to point out and remind myself and others, finding a group of individuals to lay at the blame all of this at the feet of is attractive and alluring, but potentially just another ego trap. Because this may all very well have its root source origin in those netherworld intradimensional divine spaces that we routinely neglect. But that's a deep, complex line of reasoning, which I think I connect to here in this next bit of tape. And I know for a fact I've talked about in various episodes of this podcast in the past. Therefore, there already should be a pin on the board. Let's re-attenuate the minds of our collective listening and power through the last portion of this tape.
And I really hope that Marvel/Disney Plus doesn't suddenly own the phrase. But I wouldn't be too fucking surprised in a sort of you can't shock a true cynic kind of way if they did, though. But what if, dear friends, we lived in a world where the living holographic fractal that is the very ground we walk on and the air we breathe and the cosmos we admire and try to measure from afar is part of an integrated expression of all possible perceivable phenomena for life forms to live through. And what if, friends, as some of the more exotic metaphysical theory indicates, it is possible not only to gain a higher level of awareness that modifies, or what's the right term here, that helps us transcend the worst of our base impulses, but there's perhaps hitherto long forgotten and quite urgently needing to be rediscovered spiritual practices that might actually heal those with illness, and that would render the chaos of the ills of our world a little less chaotic and a little less ill. I don't pretend to know something that I don't know. I'm just earnestly encouraging the public discourse about why aren't we turning our attention towards things that would indeed facilitate not only the entire human species, but the entire interconnected living family of species that we are on this planet. Because genetically speaking, it's undeniable. Like the living genome webs a spiral, four-dimensional, interconnected web of life. Now, there's a lot of weird, fundamentally inconvenient things about nature when one thinks about it stripped bare of all the convenience we've brought to it with our technology. But healing and transcending all the toxicity, because it must not be forgotten. as stressful as it is to acknowledge it, and forgive me for bringing it up, but everything we do is toxic. Everything. Name me one thing that isn't as the Good Place show. I don't know how to reference it without sounding a bit corny, but as the brilliant piece of pop culture media The Good Place posits, theoretically, we might very well live in a universe where every action taken is so inseparably, intrinsically intertwined in a pre-existing web of yuck, of counterproductive impact, right? The toxicity footprint on everything we do, even if we calculate all the good things that we're trying to do to render it better, hitherto, up until this point, not cutting it and severely unsustainable. Now we can rationalize our way to a better technological system of systems, right? But therein sits waiting for us many a ego trap, both real and imagined, many a dangerous corner we could turn, both real and imagined and fear-mongered about. And yeah, we need to tread lightly and mindfully as we try to do that. But also, technology being what it is and limited to the inherent flaws of our own bringing it into existence, what if there really were a set of practices, a set of metaphysical tools that we could refamiliarize ourselves with, rediscover, as one quote attributed to the Buddha puts it, frames the whole phenomena, because it is something that exists organically in the universe.
To recap, because that was a word salad and a half, I agree. Let us formulate it in the simplest, pseudoscientific terms. Because I'm not a scientist. I'm a literary character pretending to be a radio disc jockey, here to entertain my opinion at you. But let's be pseudoscientific about it, with that citizen scientist kind of attitude, not the this is fake news kind of attitude. Because we want it to become real science, right? The best science was innovated by weirdos in their garage, right? Yes, there's a lot of problems with science. Pin on the corkboard already. Spiral around, come back to it. What was I going to say about something scientific? Oh, if then, therefore, if the universe is a living holographic fractal consciousness manifesting multiverse of multiverses being brought into existence perpetually through the sacred geometric unfolding of a cosmic cosmology that could be described as a divine algorithm of the imagination of God, rendering all potential, possible, plausible realities into existence for the purposes of experiencing them through itself, vis-a-vis these two-way radio, Wi-Fi enabled, ambulatory, semi-conscious, semi-autonomous movie cameras and flesh skin suits for divine consciousness. There we go. I tried to make it simple and it just made it a huge word salad. If the universe is a giant living video game for God, then maybe, and you'll see this all harkens back to the top of the show, right? If the universe is a giant living, not artificial, not dead, not inert, not simulated, but alive video game for God, and there's many levels to play through, and when we play, we we pick up this in-game gamer amnesia that we are player one, the divine being, making all of this happen for itself to enjoy, but we confuse ourselves with the individual perspective, like Free Guy in the movie Free Guy, which I haven't even seen yet, but from the previews, I gather it's close enough in what happens that I think it works as an analogy, even if it's flawed because of whatever I don't know about the movie. We'll find out. I'll have to go watch it at some point, because I'm sure it's going to be put on my list of like, isn't this neat? And it kind of resonates with what's going on here. Put a pin on the board, totally irrelevant media review reference. We'll go back to that there. And there's a pin on the corkboard near that cluster of pins there about media references that reference this. There's a beautifully simple, entertaining, and illuminating explanation about this in a particular episode of the Midnight Gospel on Netflix. I forget which episode, and I'm not going to go dig it up. It'll take longer than I want it to. But if you've got access to Netflix, get on that. And if you have never watched The Midnight Gospel on Netflix, thumbs up, genuine, authentic, 19 out of 20 star review. Actually, that one deserves a 20 out of 20. And there's a particular episode where some hardcore traditional ancient cosmological models of Buddhist cosmology are illuminated and illustrated and discussed, and we get to a postmodern analogy. To paraphrase from the show, it's like we're wearing virtual reality goggles, and then what we do with our everyday life is like putting on another pair of virtual reality goggles on top of that. Like our bodies are virtual reality goggle suits. And then our workaday rat life, those missions, those quests are a virtual mental set of virtual reality goggles. Culture and society are another layer of another additional invisible set of virtual reality goggles that we wear. And those assumptions and stuff are projected on to our way of interpreting the main central reality, which we are interpreting through this living two-way mirror. God is watching us as we live our lives through the inside of us, right? From deep within. The only way out is in. Not that there's a way. Let's pause here and cross-reference an issue. Lots of talk in the spiritual circles, people that self-identify with spirituality and that sort of bandwidth over there, and that quadrant of social media. Lots of talk about escaping the matrix. There's a little bit of Venn diagram crossover to the political talk in the radicalized, highly polarized, ideological, especially in American politics, this right versus left versus Trumptopian love triangle of argumentation, because that's by the way, that's how I've always thought of it. As you listen to the last 5 years of the podcast, please do understand that's been at the core, expressed or unexpressed. There's this lack of appreciation from that camp. And what I'm questioning here in this episode is if our body suits, as many of us do realize, right? Despite the fact that we get lots of manipulative misunderstanding, misinformation, and weirdly trending, like erroneous and flawed ideas circulating in spiritual communities, the ultimate discerning, the crucible of discernment is not any arguological, I think I just made up a new word for the ideology of argumentation. The crucible of discernment, if I could also make up another new term, I don't know that that's a term I've used before, but I feel as if it's always resonated in my thinking throughout. The true, genuine, authentic, undeniable crucible of discernment, curiously, resides in the realm of the subjective, which is anathema to materialists, right? And anathema to the system of oppression for similar but sometimes different reasons. And put a pin on those on the corkboard if you haven't already. We'll circle back and talk about those, and I'm sure both past, present, and future. Let us proceed with a little bit more, the last leg of the coming around the mountain here on our note from earlier.
To lean into that reference I just made, as metaphor, it's a path. It's a living path with gifts and blessings and tools along the way that exists independent of our awareness of it.
I didn't bridge well. I realized that. So the baby in the bathwater I'm trying to save from drowning is, speculatively speaking, any and all real, authentic, genuine, birthright phenomena that life on this planet is either tragically unaware of through no fault of anyone's own, or being manipulatively distracted from for nefarious purposes by hitherto unidentified, elite, etc., which I would argue are only a symptomology of a deep spiritual trauma that resides, recursively, in this shared spiritual space that we neglect, that we've been manipulated or have tragically forgotten about. Therefore, solutions, if all problematic issues that arise in human culture that can be collectively identified as corruption or evil, etc., things of that ilk, if that all arises not necessarily from one centralized top-down tyranny of the cult of whatever this people have projected and or written extensive theory about it, not to say that that isn't possibly happening or isn't actually happening, but rather that it isn't the root, but rather the fruit. And if you're chopping away at the fruit of the tree, but never at the root of the tree, and the tree is evil, then what are you doing? You're just helping to spread the seeds. Dun dun dun. Dramatic reveal, attenuation moment music. Insert here. Don't have that yet. Along with DJ Zed's animatronic gizmo whirligig sound effects for when he's like, move it along. So, what if, dear friends, there are indeed birthright, neglected, organic, naturally occurring spiritual practices and tools, for lack of a better term, that we could have access to, but aren't allowing ourselves to have access to. And all we need to do is really collectively attenuate ourselves, tune in to the shared bandwidth of internal psycho-spiritual frequencies and explore a terrain, a topography of this living holographic universe that we have been temporarily wearing goggles, screens, sunshades of blocking out from our sight. And if it's out of sight, it's out of our mind, therefore it's out of our awareness. But that we can return to by simply taking those imaginary, ideological, mind-harnessing, mind-limiting goggles off. Why wouldn't we want to explore that deeper? Let's find out what I wrap up the end of this tape with, which may or may not have culminate to a similar point, or may peter out in a sort of I forgot what I was talking about kind of way, which often happens too. I apologize now. Here we go.
And that we, for better or worse, consciously or unconsciously, chose collectively as a species to kind of ignore and turn away from. But if we were to rediscover it and implement it and activate it and reap the benefit and rewards of investing in it, whatever it is, because I don't pretend to know it fully. As a different thing I'm referencing might remind us, the path is unknowable, but I vow to know it. All I'm humbly suggesting is, wouldn't that have if it has a 10% chance, never mind a much higher likelihood, what if we could prove, to take the trip theoretical even further, that it had 100% confirmable chance of being infinitely more effective at healing, transmuting, transcending every imaginable ill. And I know that sounds, well, you're stumbling right into utopian panaceas, man, and we don't believe in those. Aha. Intrinsic in this argument is that the power of belief must be reckoned with in a way that we've been neglecting. If you choose, as many a different wise fool tried to remind us in many different ways, if you choose to believe in a negative, you won't find any evidence for the thing you're not believing in. If you choose to not believe in God, you will never experience the grace of God. If you choose to believe in the denial of magic, you won't be able to perceive, let alone even conceive of, the raw organic magic that exists in the world. For friends, I say to you, I ask you now, if being able to wake up and take a breath and think these thinky thoughts, whatever absurdities you're enjoying, and love and feel compassion and feel the highs and the lows and the healing transitions in between and feel the full expression, if that's not magic, if the full weird wackiness of what the fuck is going on here isn't some kind of magic, then we belittle magic in its organic reality and its organic potential in reality. I'm not talking about fairy tale magic of things that are not possible within the realm of the knowable, known, measurable, verifiable universe. But even the knowable, known, measurable, verifiable universe has not been yet fully explored and contains many a weird, mysterious thing. One of which is the very practice that I myself am engaging in when I create this content with you. Because it isn't just about me saying the words, but it's about the journey we go on together when we sit in time-independent unity and share the experience of you hearing the words as I say them, and they being, activating whatever theater of the mind you bring to it. And on that note, friends, I thank you for tuning in. This has been another not quite ready for live thinky thought note of the day, which I'll probably turn into a Nugget of Zen episode. Yes, we're going to call it today's Nugget of Zen before I was ready to do Nugget of Zen. And now back to myself live hosting the podcast so I can sign off and bid you adieu and tease you with other things.
Well, that's what I had to say about that. But I want to sort of bring it to a more complete bit of closure. And also, wait, is that playing? It's still playing. Pause. There we go. I referenced something there at the end. And I realized I could dig it up and have it in front of me here so I can redo the whole thing. With a bit of music. First, just to clear the mental palate, this is DJ Zed, Urgent Uprisings Rally, a live-to-tape performance of the UK Baseline audio asset on the Remix Live app for your entertainment and listening robotic dance pleasure. The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness. An inability to directly experience our true nature. An inability to recognize this nature in everyone and in all things. Realizing that there is only one consciousness. To awaken one's true self, one must awaken all beings. There are innumerable sentient beings in the universe. I vow to help them all to awaken. My imperfections are inexhaustible. I vow to overcome them all. The Dharma is unknowable. I vow to know it. The way of awakening is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Namaste. This has been your double wide, extra deluxe bonus super long episode of today's Nugget of Zen. A special episodic sub-mini series featured on the Almost Daily ZenCast. A production of CTAG Studios, a production studio that exists entirely in my mind. Thanks for tuning in. Peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts, folks. Head on over to all the other Zeppo Universe madness by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Check out all the different kinds of content that I'm inviting you to engage with collaboratively and as audience and contributor of questions, thoughts, and comments, etc. Always welcome. And find ways to support this struggling content creating artist on the internets and enjoy yourself as you tour the various dimensions of the Zeppoverse. I don't know why I pushed play, because I was totally meaning to sign off right there and say goodbye, so peace out.